Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Fleet Geeks podcast. Beverley's smiling. She's heard it for the third time now, me doing an introduction to the Fleet Geeks thing, and I put my perfect phone voice on. But I'm really grateful for all you listeners coming to join us today and have a listen to Beverley and I chew the fat. Today we're going to be talking about mental health, which is really exciting. If this is the first one that you've tuned into, we've got two previous ones last 2 weeks where we talked about maintenance and then we talked about training last week. Beverley, just for the benefit of the listeners, if this is the first one they're tuning into and they've never heard of Beverley Bell, who is she and what does she do?
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed for the invitation. What does Beverley Bell do in her work life? Tries to help operators stay on the road to compliance. In her personal life, I say publicly, drink gin and eat chocolate, but actually that's not very good for my own physical or mental health. So I try to do things that are much more, positive and healthy, like long walks and read books. But yeah, I try to help operators stay on the road to compliance.
Yeah, that's fantastic and a very noble cause as well. One that's close to my heart as well. So today we're going to talk about mental health in particular in the sector, and I think that it's a very interesting and varied subject. Obviously, very wide ranging, and in reality, we've not prepared a great deal of information prior to talking about it. So I think I will start by framing that as an organisation at Flagship, we offer workplace training, not just within the sector, but elsewhere as well. We also do bespoke courses. I have some challenges around the training of mental health overall in general in the UK. I think that similar to the conversations actually Beverley and I have just had on training, if you've listened to that podcast already, one of the things that's already started to happen in the mental health space is that we've started to create a tick box exercise where we do mental health first aiders, right? And we start training those into organisations and putting them in. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a place for that, which I think there is. I think it's good to have people with a deeper knowledge of mental health in workplaces, but at the same time, what potentially we risk doing by doing that is semi-training people to think that they're counsellors, which is a proper qualification and a proper skill set, which takes a long time for people to train and develop over a period of time where they're absolute specialists. And I also think that fundamentally, if we go and train a couple of people in a workplace for 2 to 3 days, maybe we're better off introducing a shorter course for a broad range in the workplace, because I think what's most important in a workplace scenario is affecting the culture around mental health and the conversations and the openness and the transparency and being able to create an environment which is supportive to people. And I often think that if we're going to invest in it, I think if we're going to invest in training, particularly around mental health, I think it's a good thing to do it in a broader spectrum, but maybe not quite as deep as what the mental health first aid is, where it's several days. I think it's good for lots of people to have a good understanding and have an open mind around this stuff. And I think fundamentally employers have a duty of care to raise that awareness and to be able to get their people speaking openly, transparently and non-judgmentally around mental health and well-being for people. Anyway, that's my little soapbox. I'm going to stop ranting for a minute, Beverley, and let you come in. What do you think? What do you think? Mental health first aiders, mental health training in the workplace? What's your thoughts?
I think it all starts and finishes with the culture of the organisation.
Sure.
And the culture of the industry.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a bully boy culture, or you've got you're not worth anything to this company unless you're working 18 hours a day, then you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're not going to achieve very much. So I think it starts and finishes with that culture. I think an awful lot of companies, particularly obviously commercial vehicle operators, which is what we're talking about, have become alive to this issue. And sort of we have sort of the pre-COVID and the post-COVID world, don't we?
Yeah.
And, you know, I've been banging on for years about mental health pre-COVID, and people would look at me and go, oh, God, she's on about that again. You know, it's not really an issue. They're just feeling a bit fed up. Excuse me, or they're just feeling a bit depressed. They'll be fine next week. Or go to doctors and get some tablets. And now I think sometimes there's a bit too much emphasis on mental health.
Sure.
I interviewed somebody for a role, and she said, oh, I think I'll like working here. I think you'll be good for my mental health. Well, that's not actually my job as an employer. Yes, I want to have a culture of openness and caring and fulfilling our duty of care. So I think it can sometimes be a bit of a stick to beat people with. Sure. In terms of your question about first aiders, my view is that if you are going to have members of staff who are going to interact with people who are unwell mentally or are going through a tough time, you've really got to train those people properly, because they could do more damage than they could do good. So I think if they're going to do that, it's got to be the proper training, and it's got to also be the right qualities. I'll just tell you this, years ago, Joan Aitken, Traffic Commissioner for Scotland, told us that she was a Samaritan. And I said, oh, Joan, that's amazing. That's wonderful. I said, maybe I should be a Samaritan. She said, look to me. She said, Beverley, you'd be hopeless. And she's right. I would be hopeless. I would. So it's all about getting the right people with the right skills, not just saying, oh, well, you'll go on a mental health first aid course, which is very different from an ordinary physical first aid course.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And one of the things that I do find as well is that, generally speaking, the people who will often volunteer to go and do those courses will be the people who have got an interest, normally due to their own lived experience. And sometimes they're not the best people to go and do that, because what happens is they tend to relate everything back to their experience rather than the whole. A really good quality counsellor doesn't do much talking. In reality, a really good quality counsellor is a professional listener.
Yes,
they're a professional listener that get people to talk very well, and that then indicates the qualities that we're looking for in a person who would be an effective person to go and do a mental health first aid course, because it's much more about the listening than it is about the talking.
And it's about hearing. Sorry, can I just come back on that? It's about listening out for those sort of red markers, because one of the things, I think it was in the other podcast we were talking about, in the TMCPC refresher, we talk about skills and competencies, and the article I've just written for motor transport about skills and competencies of a transport manager. And it's not just talking to the drivers, it's listening to the drivers. It's observing their body language. It might be smelling alcohol on their breath, or it might be they look awful. So it's not just about talking to, it's about all those other things that might be markers that somebody's not very well or going through a tough time. Because it's not just about being unwell. It could be that, you know, one of my favourite quotes is from John Lennon, which is, you know, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. And you plan to do this, and then something comes along and hits you in the face, and it all goes wrong. And when I used to do my presentations when I was a TC, I used to try and do it in a light-hearted way. I used to say, well, you know, your driver might be fed up because the mother-in-law's moved in, or they might be fed up because the mother-in-law's moved out and it's just them and the wife, you know, or the dog's died. And I try to do it in a light-hearted way. But, you know, death, divorce, debt, all those things can have real impacts on people's mental well-being. And we expect drivers to get behind the wheel of a 44-ton Arctic or a 53-seater coach and turn into an automaton, when what they're trying to do is put behind them their problems at home and concentrate on doing their job. And it's tough.
Yeah,
it is tough.
Absolutely, Beverley. So I think you're absolutely right. Moving away from that discussion around training, I think there's certain things, like you said before, around the 18-hour culture. So many companies in our industry I come across where it's an expectation that people will answer the phone whilst they're on holiday, whilst they're at the weekend, taking work home with them. And I think we need to start to recognize that people need to switch off for a start. We need to, if you're listening to this and you've got a team of people in the transport sector, you need to allow your people time to switch off. They need to have time away from work. They need to not be shamed for taking their holiday and not using their phone, because I've come across that as well. We need to anticipate that people are able to have time away, and at the same time, like you say, we need to develop transport and fleet managers who listen and recognise that the drivers will need support from time to time, because, like you say, there might be things that are totally unrelated to work, where life happens, where things go wrong, and people have to cope with those, and their ability to cope varies through different stages in their life and based on some of the stuff that's happening. Some terrible things will be happening to, if you employ a team of drivers, and that's a cross section of society, those people are going to have a range of potentially horrible things happening. And like you say, we need to be alert to knowing who needs the support, and when to be able to get them that support, and where to go for it as well.
And define coping. There are many high functioning alcoholics who work and are ostensibly extremely capable, but their coping mechanism is excess alcohol or drugs. I had to advise a client the other day, two of their staff, two drivers, had a bit of a fisticuffs on company premises, which is not a good idea. So, they went to see one who was the assailant, and obviously they dealt with him. And then they went to see the victim in his cab, and they opened the cab door and it absolutely stank of cannabis. So, I know, nightmare. Driver shortage, but, there's only one way that driver's going, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But why? Why is the driver doing that? There'll be a reason why. It might be that home life's miserable and that's the only way he can cope or she can cope. I'm not justifying it, but I'm saying it's what's going on in people's lives,
Sure.
while we expect them to be perfect. And what do we mean by mental health? Do we mean being a bit depressed? Do we mean actually thinking we might do something silly? And how do we perceive it when we look at other people? And of course, if you say to me, now then, Beverley, how are you? Apart from me telling you about my man flu, I say, oh, I'm fine.
Sure.
I'm not going to tell you everything that's going on in my life that might be causing me a problem. And when it's your employer, you definitely don't want to tell them.
No.
Because you might worry that you're going to lose your job as a result of it, or your ability to drive. That's one of the big problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that thing around, so there's a fear, isn't there, often around sharing that the mental health is a challenge, because you might be overlooked for other opportunities, you might be overlooked for promotional opportunities as well. So there's absolutely a bit of a challenge there, and I think you're absolutely right when it comes to coping. What does coping mean? And I do think that's where raising the standards of understanding in an organisation is really important, and overall in an industry, because I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes around mental health, and that is that it's actually perfectly normal on occasion to feel a bit depressed.
Oh,
and it's
sorry, it's my.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's perfectly normal to feel a little bit depressed. It's perfectly normal to feel a little bit anxious sometimes when things coming up that you feel that you're pushing your boundaries of expertise, or anxiety and a bit of stress sometimes can be good as well. I talk about stress in the workplace with some of our clients, and stress can be a positive thing. Us having a podcast, us recording a podcast, it's not the most relaxing thing, because we need to be alert to it. There is a level of stress to it which helps us perform, helps us think, help us share ideas, help us come up with those things. So that's a positive stress. So I think there is definitely an education piece around the fact that I can feel stressed from time to time. I can feel anxious from time to time, and I can feel depressed from time to time. But actually, fundamentally, I'm okay and I'm coping well enough to be able to function normally in my role, and it's not affecting me. But knowing when the boundaries are, and it will be unique to everybody, but where actually we do need to be able to offer support to people where it's needed, because it is, fundamentally it's a human thing where we need to be able to. I think the worry is where we're in such a environment where if we make mistakes, they can be catastrophic, and the warning signs are often there. So we need to know to be able to pick up on those warning signs. And I think we need to educate people, particularly planners, transport managers, those kinds of things, to be able to deal with those things. Are you okay to talk?
Yes, because I'm thinking about it, because you've got both the physical and the mental.
Yes.
And, we use the Glasgow bin lorry crash as one of our ways of talking about, physical and mental welfare and well-being, because the two are often inextricably linked. And
Absolutely.
let's not forget, lots of people are actually addicted to noradrenaline. They're adrenaline junkies. They like that buzz. And lots of people in transport love that buzz.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
I've had a situation where my challenge stemmed from, I was really poorly when I was younger. When I was around 18, I suffered a really bad situation where I was on a life support machine for several weeks. Yeah. I had this thing called a lung hemorrhage. It was quite traumatic, very traumatic for my parents. They nearly lost me at the age of nearly 18. I was in hospital for a long period of time. Now, one of the things at that time, back in the day when I was that young lad, was that when you went into intensive care, or in my case, I went to NICU at the Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, which was like a specialist neuro intensive care unit. I saw a lot of death. So 1 in 2 people would go out with the white cover over them, and as I started to get better physically, there was a big impact on my strength. I'd lost a lot of weight over the 6 weeks that I was unconscious for. I'd lost 25 kilos, a lot of strength, and a lot of, I had some real issues sort of coming back. One of the things that you then have is this thing called survivor syndrome. So I was like, well,
yes.
I felt that I wasn't worthy. There was a lot of investment in getting me better. And that impacted me, and I didn't understand it or know about it, and I didn't realise. And why I'm such a big advocate for us educating people around this is, that happened to me at 18. That was still affecting me probably into my early 30s. There was an element at some level. This was an underriding issue that occasionally, and particularly when other bad things happen, that would make it more severe for me. But underlying, I had some really unresolved issues around what had happened, and this fear around my life and my mortality, and all the other stuff that sort of goes along hand in hand with that. And back in those days, when you went in, now if you go into intensive care, you get counselling standard. It's just a standard thing that happens. You go in, you survive, you get counselling as part of that process, because it is traumatic. And it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing back in the early 2000s when I went in. And I didn't realise how much of an impact it had had. And as I started to sort of deal with it and sort of come through it, I realised that I'd actually had this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And as I was coming to terms with that, I was employed at the time, not by myself, but by someone else. And I went and spoke to my manager and I said, look, I'm getting some support because I've got post-traumatic stress around this illness that I had. The response was laughter. I chuckled to myself because of the response of my line manager, who was a very experienced professional in his role for many, many years, chuckled and said, post-traumatic stress, but you've never been to war. That's a soldier's issue. And I just was like, I ended up, it wasn't just that reason. It'd be a bit petty of me to have left the role just based on that alone. But it wasn't particularly helpful, is all I'm going to say. It wasn't particularly helpful at that stage. And I think we need to educate people to be a lot more, managers in that position. When people make a disclosure about stuff, they need to be in a position and equipped to be able to handle that in an effective way.
Well, that's the point I was making, because that statement was made through ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, from how you describe it, it was made through ignorance, which goes back to the point I made right at the start about the danger of sending somebody on a course and going, right, you can be a mental health first aider now, and actually they can do more harm than good. And there is such a lot of ignorance out there about things, and also, things are given labels sometimes,
Sure.
and people don't understand what that actually means. Because if you asked if you asked 10 people in the street what is PTSD, they wouldn't actually be able to tell you.
Yeah, sure.
So how do they even recognize it in people if it manifests itself openly? It's a huge subject. All I've ever wanted to do in my former role and in my current one is raise awareness.
Yes.
Raise awareness, and then make sure that they've got the right systems in place. Clients have got the right systems in place, policies, procedures, support networks to then deal with it when it does raise its head.
Beverley, I totally agree with you. And I think that's a really nice way to actually conclude the podcast, because it is very much about, you spoke about it, I've spoken about it. That makes it okay to talk about, right? So by having an open conversation, you shared, so I felt it was good to share. And that's a really good learning for those listening, is that if we share those stories, if we raise awareness, it allows people to open up and have those conversations. And like you say, that's fundamentally the purpose of this. We're not going to resolve workplace mental health or stress in a 20-minute podcast, but what we can do is raise awareness, reassure people it's okay to talk about, and to get the right structures in place to affect their culture positively. Beverley, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me for these last 3 episodes. I've really enjoyed it. It's been loads of fun. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that likewise, I've really enjoyed it. But Pete, I think you're a consummate professional. And you don't know I'm going to say this, but I want to. I have a reputation for being tough and horrible to men. I'm not, actually. I love men. But I am really impressed by what you do. I'm really impressed by your passion, and it's not a word I use a lot, passion, but your commitment to the causes. And I think you're fabulous, quite frankly. So thank you for asking me to take part in your podcast. So thank you.
And thank you for taking the time out for joining me. I really appreciate it. And your kind words as well. That's made my day. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Beverley, I'll see you soon. And to the listeners, thanks for listening. Beverley obviously runs Beverley Bell Consulting. Follow her on LinkedIn for posts about people's toenail clippings on ferries.
Oh, yes. It raised a very important issue.
It absolutely did. I had to raise it at some point. I was trying to work out when I was going to raise that, but it made me chuckle yesterday when I saw it.
Well, my children said, "Don't put it on, Mummy, don't put it on." And my media executive said, "Put it on, put it on." Yeah. I just couldn't believe that. I mean, and then you saw somebody put in the response where there's actually signs up on some of the tube stations about not doing it. But anyway, a bit of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, make sure you follow Beverley on LinkedIn, and her business is Beverley Bell Consulting and Training. Beverley, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.